Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of What's the Res, an ongoing conversation about the current resolutions in the world of high school debate. My name is Josh Herring. I'm a debate coach at Thales Academy in Rolesville, North Carolina. I'm joined today by my co-host Ethan Dells and our very special guest, who I'll introduce in just a moment. I'm very excited to welcome you to this episode because this is the official launch of our second season here on What's the Res. Ethan and I started this back in February of 2019 as an experiment to see if we could get a podcast going about debate, and we've had enormous success with this. We're coming up on 4,500 downloads, and we have about 50 episodes to date. Going forward into this year, we're going to be doing public forum episodes every time the NSDA releases a new resolution. We'll have Lincoln Douglas episodes as they release resolutions, Coolidge episodes. We'll also be doing monthly World Schools episodes. We'll be looking at some of the World School resolutions that are released for prepared tournaments. And we'll also be doing our normal kind of round of some episodes looking at debate techniques, other episodes looking at support for debaters, sometimes with expert interviews, and so on. So we are, first and foremost, very thankful to you, our listeners, for your support of everything we're doing here at What's the Res. In Season 2, we'll be aiming to do 2 to 3 episodes per week and trying to drop on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule. So be sure to subscribe on whichever podcast app you enjoy listening on so that you can keep up with the latest information and episodes here at What's the Res. So today our guest is international economist Dr. Roberto Salinas Leon. Roberto is the president of the Mexico Business Forum. He's also the president of the Alamos Alliance, the director of the Center for Latin America with the Atlas Network. He holds an MA and PhD in philosophy from Purdue University. He was also a triple major from Hillsdale College in undergrad days, focusing on political economy, history, and philosophy. He is also a senior debate fellow and debate lecturer at the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Foundation, where Ethan and I met Roberto this last July. Roberto, welcome to What's the Res?
Josh, Ethan, it's wonderful to be here and greatly look forward to this chat, and congratulations on this great effort.
Thank you so much. I think Ethan and I both know where you are, but help our listeners know where are you recording from today?
I'm recording from Mexico City. I'm based in Mexico City, even though, as we talked about when we met, I travel a great deal. But home is Mexico City, and that's where my office and my work is established.
Awesome.
Fantastic. That's that also officially makes this our first international recording, which
I guess it does.
I'm pretty excited about.
That's pretty cool.
Well, Roberto, tell us a little bit about your work. Looking at your website, I was impressed at the various titles that you hold. It sounds like you do a lot of things in a lot of areas. How would you describe your work?
I would describe my work as I'm not exactly sure what I do, but I do a great deal of it. But I'm very oriented in policy issues and in intellectual issues. And linked with universities here in Mexico and universities in Latin America, institutions like the Coolidge Foundation, also Cato Institute and Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C., many think tanks around the world. Recently, I've become involved with Atlas Network, which is sort of like a holding, or rather a capital venture fund of think tanks. What they do is they fund over 450 think tanks around the world, and I'm currently heading their Latin America program, which has been a lot of work, but very exciting. In addition to that, I also do some research. I used to be much more involved in writing and in economic journalism, television, radio, articles in U.S. media and worldwide media, but especially here in Mexico, with weekly columns and whatnot. So very active on that, and also on the lecture circuit. And about 10 years ago, a group of us, a very small group, started an investment advisory practice where because of some of the interesting reforms in trade and in telecommunications and other sectors that have occurred in Mexico, we've tried to develop an investment advisory practice and letting companies or funds or individuals that want to invest in Mexico sort of learn the ropes and what to look for and be careful about the obstacles that are on their way, and try to give as much of a helping hand but what we like to describe was a soft landing in an otherwise complex investment environment. A lot of that has changed, unfortunately, with the current administration, but we still believe that we can rekindle this practice. But in the meantime, I've become more oriented with policy issues involving trade, involving internal reform, involving the political system, involving U.S.-Mexico relations, and involving the global economy, the global outlook in the economy at large. Part of this is what I do with what you earlier described, Josh, as the Alamos Alliance. Which is, that's the name of an annual conference, a very prestigious conference that takes place in the northern state of Sonora, in the gorgeous town of Alamos. Alamos is one of these colonial treasures where many Canadian and U.S. people have retired. So it's actually, there are a lot of expats there that live there, and a large crowd from UCLA. So Clay LaForce, Dean Emeritus of the Anderson School of Management, together with a great Latin American economist, Al Harberger, and a few of his students from all over Latin America, decided to basically form a hangout with an annual meeting off the record. But some of these were former central bank governors or current governors as the central bank, or finance ministers, or people, or Nobel Prize winning economists, people of great stature that would come on an annual basis. And it's a small group. It's about 40 approximately that get together. And recently, in the past 10 years or so, it's gotten quite a buzz. So I'm fortunate that the board has asked me to direct and operate this this project. So that also keeps me very busy, but very much on the forefront of what the current global debates and economic and political trends are all about. So yeah, I keep busy. I also have time to watch European soccer, and believe it or not, even the NFL.
What's your favorite team?
Oh, come on. I'm from Mexico. It's got to be the Dallas Cowboys, man.
Nice. That's a lot of things on that list for sure. And I mean, that's a lot of different things too. It's a lot of different groups. Do you have like a favorite kind of event to participate in, or is it policy writing? Is it attending events? What's your top thing on that list?
I miss writing. I do sort of very selected articles now. It's much harder for me now that I've sort of lost the inertia or the original groove. But I'm really happy with the work I'm doing with Atlas Network. I think it's been extremely exciting. We recently held a very important Latin America forum in the Dominican Republic, where we had over, my goodness, almost 300 attendees, all of them tremendous prestige. And what was most exciting, many from the U.S. and even from Europe that attended, what was most exciting is to be able to count on real experts on places like Venezuela, which is not really a topic that is covered very much in the United States. And sometimes I'm surprised that very sophisticated people in finance or in the entrepreneurial world, and especially in policy or intellectuals, they're almost completely ignorant of the tremendous tragedy that is undergoing in Venezuela, and why this should be an example for those that would like to sort of preach the nostalgia of democratic socialism, which I understand is very well intentioned, and there are many very good points. But, the solutions that you have to offer have to be real and have to be pragmatic, and you have to look at the evidence. And the evidence, as far as Venezuela is concerned, and there are other countries and other places in the world, but Venezuela is one of the greatest tragedies in modern history as far as economic mismanagement is concerned. So we were able to count on the participation of some really cool people and fantastic speakers that told us the story about Venezuela. But also we had some wonderful Argentinian communicators telling us about the elections that are forthcoming in October, and whether the Macri regime is going to be able to win a re-election, issues on governing trade, also on the nature of populism and how do you define populism, whether it's right wing or left wing or up or down or whatever. Populism seems to be all the rage all over the world. So that's part of the work that Atlas does, and so I'm really proud and I'm very privileged to be involved in it. I'm also very fond of the Coolidge debate. I think that's one of the greatest programs that you'll see. Very creative, because not only do they take you somewhere really far, difficult to get to. Imagine for me, it's flying to Boston, which is a 6-hour flight, and then driving 3 hours to Plymouth Notch. So it's going to Europe in one day. And I've been going for many years now, and I'm very privileged that they've invited us. And what I think is really cool, and then, your audience and what the rest is going to appreciate about the Calvin Coolidge debate. First of all, it takes place on 4th of July weekend. 4th of July was also the birthday of President Coolidge. So you have this beautiful procession that takes place to honor the memory of President Coolidge, who died at a very young age. He was only 60. And so we go and we do the honors. But then there's also this debate challenge that takes place among the winners of basically a year-round debate competition that takes place. And it doesn't matter what the topic is. This year was unilateral free trade, whether it's good or bad. It can be immigration, whether it's good or bad, or it can be property rights, well-defined property rights, if they're good or bad, or it can be whether integration with the rest of the world is good or bad, or capitalism versus socialism, which are the best. It doesn't matter. You have to learn to debate. You have to learn how to talk to each other.
So
and
true.
When you're seeing that 14 to 18-year-old teenagers are devoting their time not to a soccer camp or to a Fortnite camp or something else. Here they are. They're assembling in this gorgeous place on 4th of July and doing these very intense debate rounds. And I've had 12 and 13-year-olds come up to me with more sophisticated questions than I've gotten when I've done congressional testimony before the U.S. Congress.
No way.
I think that is absolutely awesome, and I'm really, really happy to be a part of it. I missed it last year because we had presidential elections in Mexico. That was the only reason that I missed it. Well, it was also the Soccer World Cup, and that also kept me very busy, as it does every 4 years. But no, I mean, I think it's awesome work, and so those are two of my favorite projects. I also love doing the Alamos Alliance, though it basically means that I have to kill myself working from basically November to February. My New Year's begins February, the Monday of President's Day weekend, which is when my conference in Alamos ends. So I take a whole week there.
Oh, wow.
Well, Roberto, that was fascinating. It seems like so much of your work involves bringing people together across different national boundaries over important economic issues. I wonder if you could take us back. I remember I was really intrigued. I wanted to meet you in part when I saw in your bio at the Coolidge Cup that you're a Hillsdale grad. And I was wondering if you could just share with us some of your experiences about being a student from Mexico at Hillsdale College. Was Hillsdale super diverse when you were there, or not, or what was it like being an international student coming into the States at that time?
Well, there were few international students, very few, and actually for that reason, being such a small college, we became friends very, very quickly. So one of my best friends was from Singapore. Another one was from Guatemala, who later basically I was best man at his wedding, Jose Escobar, and there was a couple of others from Ecuador. There was another Mexican that we sort of hang out, not very much, but the Venezuelans were awesome. I mean, I still keep in touch with them, and we later became roommates at a house that we rented. 2 blocks down from the main campus. Everything's 2 blocks down from the main campus in Hillsdale. So,
Too true.
Like, it's a very big place. It was a big culture shock when I arrived, coming from a city that back then in the early 80s was 14 million people, to a little town in the middle of nowhere in southern Michigan. With what is it, 8,000 inhabitants or 6,000 inhabitants?
Sounds about right.
Like that. It was a big culture shock, but there was those friendships that allowed me to adapt. And I must say, it had quite a cool academic program. Their liberal arts program back then was very strong. Their econ was not very strong when I was there. They happened to be going through a transition. But their lecture series was spectacular. And when I was a senior in 1983, I actually wanted to stay another year. To me, it would have been great. I loved it. I really enjoyed my time there. And I was able to do an internship in Washington for a whole semester, which was one of the coolest experiences of my life. I had some phenomenal teachers, and despite the lack of diversity, the professors and my colleagues there, I mean, many of them are still very, very dear friends of mine, and so it was a really cool experience.
I'm glad to hear that. I know I found it quite difficult to complete even a single major there, and I find it very impressive that you did a triple major. I am curious. I always love hearing folks who have gone the academic PhD route and then end up going in very different directions career-wise. Could tell us a bit about your doctoral research, and did that have anything to do with kind of the direction towards economic policy that you moved in the years since Purdue, or are those really unconnected parts of your life?
No, really, they're unconnected. I mean, I ended up doing a master's in philosophy at Purdue because I was offered a full scholarship there. I was offered a partial scholarship at Vanderbilt. My heart was set on going to University of Pittsburgh, but I was not accepted there. So I thought, well, Purdue is close to Hillsdale, first of all, still in the Midwest. Had many friends in Indiana, and I love their faculty. I did a visit over there, and it was a young and a great faculty, but it was what is called hardcore analytic philosophy. So it was all like philosophy of language, logics, theory, extremely rigorous. I had a great teacher at Hillsdale that managed to convince me, look, before you find out what you're going to do in life, you've been offered this great opportunity to do this master's with these great teachers. Why don't you go over there and give it a shot? So I did. And this was pre-computer time. I had to type my papers. I had to handwrite them and then type them. So, spend my time in the library, and basically I used the weekends to catch up. So no time for any socializing. Apart from, I had a good friend that lived in Chicago, so about every 8 weeks or so I'd go to Chicago and blow some steam there. And that was fun. The Cubbies game. I also like baseball. So
yes, I love baseball as well.
Well, and so imagine, the Cubs are near and dear to my heart. Anybody from Michigan, Indiana, with the exception of Notre Dame and possibly IU. Although I'm doing a lot of work with IU now, but that's just because one of my dearest friends went to IU, and IU and Purdue are supposed to have this big rivalry. But beyond that, I got into really deep philosophical issues concerning political theory and the liberalism, communitarianism debate, and the Robert Nozick, John Rawls debate, and whatnot. But I always maintained an interest in economics, and this was during the lost decade of the 1980s, where populism reigned supreme in Peru, in Argentina, in Brazil, in my own country, in Mexico. So it was quite a disaster to see when are policies ever going to change. And in 1988, I was finally offered a job by a local think tank in Mexico that was working on market-oriented policies, and especially on trade liberalization and free trade. And I knew I knew a little bit about it. I studied part of it at Hillsdale, and I always liked to read about it. And so I get back to Mexico in 1988 when Carlos Salinas de Gortari becomes president. No relation. But, well, I used to say there was, but after he was deposed in Spain, then I said no. But truly, there is no relationship with him. He started what is called in Mexico the great new first wave of reforms, where he undertook large-scale privatizations of the telephone company and of the steel companies and of many companies, and tried to rationalize public finance and lower inflation and embark on trade liberalization. And lo and behold, 2 years into his administration, it was announced that there was an interest in pursuing free trade. with the United States, a North American Free Trade Agreement. And that was at a small but influential think tank in Mexico, with some phenomenal people and some of the greatest communicators that you'll ever meet. But no one knew how to speak English. And so whenever Time Magazine called or CNN called for a comment, or whenever The Economist magazine called for a comment, they would turn it over. Hey, Roberto, come on, you got to answer this.
Nice.
And I was like, oh my goodness. So I was like petrified that I had to be a quick study on all of this. And then all of a sudden I'm getting invited to deliver lectures at Rayburn House Office Building in Washington. And I'm getting invited to testify before Congress. And so I became one of the token go-to guys from the free market perspective. And even lo and behold, Hillsdale invited me to give, as an alumni, give a speech. And so, I mean, it sounds very haughty, but I sort of became like a mini rock star on the matter.
That is awesome. And I find it interesting about the NAFTA thing too. That is just awesome.
But it's not because it's just because I had command of English, and so I could tell, well, what do I have to say? Well, look, you got to focus on comparative advantage and how this is going to benefit Mexico in the agricultural sector. And then, all of a sudden the ministers themselves were calling me. Minister Jaime Serra, who was the Mexican architect of NAFTA, is calling me to his office and saying, how can we help you? What materials do you need? And I was going over to Dallas and fighting it out with Ross Perot equivalents and whatnot. And trying to get as much media exposure as possible, because it came near and dear to my heart until it was finally approved in 1993. Just an anecdote, when in November of 1993, the U.S. Congress under Bill Clinton finally approves the North American Free Trade Agreement. It started on the 1st of January of 1994, so that means we're 25 years into NAFTA now. And I was in my honeymoon when all of a sudden, after it was approved, I had to basically take a day off to conduct a whole series of interviews, because I was getting flooded with interviews. And,
oh man!
And my office said, "Well, he's on his honeymoon." And basically, people said, "I don't care." Well, that was a pretty cool experience.
Was your wife okay with the interviews interrupting the honeymoon? I mean, that sounds like a rough deal.
It was very cool.
Wonderful.
What role did you play in NAFTA? Because I know when I was talking to you at Coolidge, you were talking about helping with NAFTA in some way. So what was your role in that process?
No, just not really in the negotiations at all. But I had the good fortune of knowing many of the people. What they call the Mexico Investment Forum. Not the business forum. It was the Mexico Investment Club,
okay.
Which is basically people in Washington coordinating with the Mexican embassy in the United States, coordinating with groups of interest that wanted to push this, coordinated with companies. So I was on the fringe of that, and so I received a great deal of information, and I would try as much as possible to get myself involved with the think tank community so that they could open spaces and either debating people from, the AFL-CIO, or debating people from the Sierra Club, or doing congressional testimony and going to New York to the Council of the Americas, Council of Foreign Relations, and Chicago, going anywhere that I could in order to lecture in favor of why this would be good for Mexico. And so that my role was much more of a media advocate and a public intellectual advocate, writing a lot for the Wall Street Journal, for Barron's, Investors Business Daily, and whatnot. And I was very fortunate to receive great support from the think tank community in Washington and in other places. And because of that, those became lifelong friendships and associations, such that in 1994, Mexico, that was the year that NAFTA was inaugurated. But in Mexico, we remember it better as the year when we had the assassination of a presidential candidate. We had the uprising, the paramilitary uprising in Chiapas with the Zapatista rebels. And then we also had the massive peso devaluation at the end in December. So all of a sudden, attention shifted from Mexico as being the darling of the emerging market and hailed as the great new economic powerhouse in the emerging market world to, an utmost disaster of a country that had completely mismanaged a massive currency devaluation. It was something like akin to what the U.S. suffered with the Great Recession. That's what, we also got completely wiped out with the Great Recession because our cycles are so tied now, since Mexico is part of the North American cycle. But in 1994, it was an absolute disaster. It was like, what happened? I mean, we were supposed to, all these people that were heralded as the great economic advisors and ministers and whatnot, all of a sudden we had to suffer the horrendous shame of having mismanaged one of the worst economic crises that Mexico has suffered. And so the very same places in Washington, in New York, in Vancouver, in Toronto, and elsewhere, and even places in Latin America and in Europe, all of a sudden wanted to know what had happened. And as a result of that, I went from trade to getting extremely involved in monetary policy, which is still a topic that is near and dear to my heart. That's how I met Amity Shlaes and people from the Wall Street Journal back in the day.
Oh, is that how you ended up being connected with the Coolidge Foundation through Amity?
That's like a 6 degrees of separation. I met Amity Shlaes at a conference I organized in Mexico, where one of the themes was the peso devaluation, and I was introduced to her by friends that I had already made at the Wall Street Journal, because she was very much associated with the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal. I had already read some of her work and had a great admiration of her communication skills and the depth of her scholarship. And then all of a sudden, when she invited me, and this was even prior to her joining the Coolidge, the Coolidge Presidential Foundation, she invited me to become involved with debate, but also with lecturing in venues when Bush got started in Dallas, and so she organized these extremely high profile nonpartisan conferences. You had both Democrats and Republicans, and it was really the focus on the issues and not so much the focus on the politics, on the political orientation. And I was fortunate enough that she invited me to join on this, and since then I've continued to have the good fortune of being of them giving the benefit of the doubt. And now I think now the friendship with Coolidge is very solid, and we have a good track record. But yeah, that's how this networking, the think tank world. What is wonderful is the tremendous networking. So the exposure that gives you to other countries, where I can basically today, I can go to Ethiopia and I know that somebody will open their doors for me and act as a host, or I can go to Tahiti and do the same thing, or I can go to Guatemala. For goodness sakes, in Guatemala, some of my best friends from the intellectual side, Guatemala, Peru, Argentina, Chile. There's tremendous contributions that the Chileans have made, and naturally the Venezuelans that we're trying to support as much as possible. I myself am married to a woman from Colombia that I met at UT, no less, at University of Texas. So yeah, that's the power of networking.
That's fascinating. I know I had several people when I was in high school. They I think it's the same idea of the 6 degrees of separation, but the line I remember them telling me was that you're only 3 people away from anyone in the world that you want to meet. And yep. I played that game a couple times, and I don't know that it always stops at 3, but it is amazing to me how interconnected people are and different institutions are, and how some institutions manage to really multiply people's connectivity in that way.
Yeah, and not only that, you form intellectual and professional relationships, but some of them turn into long-lasting friendships, and that's also another great added benefit of this exercise. So,
well, Roberto, if you don't mind, I want to shift from the past to a bit more of the present with this next question. We're recording, of course, on the eve of, tonight is the first of round 2 of the Democratic presidential primary debates. So I'm just thinking a bit more contemporarily with this next question. I know you've already mentioned that President Trump's policies have not helped Mexico. I'd love it if you could elaborate on that and maybe even extend that to President Trump's other international economic policies. I know we've had a debate resolution that was dealing with unilateral free trade touched on both Mexico and China and U.S. economic relations. I know that extends to other places as well. But generally, as an economist, as someone who's involved in monetary policy, what do you think of President Trump's economic policies? And are his policies creating conditions for long-term economic growth?
Well, some of them actually are. Though I personally think he tends to be extremely confused on the matter. I'm not sure if that's the image that he wants to give, and in truth he believes something else. I think there's a lot there of, are you going to walk the talk? And some of his talk sometimes seems to be a ploy to get things done. He said that NAFTA was the worst trade deal in history, and then he goes on and hails an agreement that is a distinction without a difference from NAFTA. Actually, it's a little bit of a step backward because of restrictions on the auto sector, which is the famous USMCA. And now he's threatening and going about that if you don't approve USMCA, or what he did with Mexico and saying that he was going to impose up to 25% tariffs if they didn't fix the immigration problem. First of all, you can't fix the immigration problem like that overnight. Not the wall and not the tariff retaliatory measures. Nothing like that to change it. What is going to change are the economic conditions in Central American countries. The illegal immigration from Mexico has dramatically dropped in the past 10 years. For every Mexican that is going into the United States legally or illegally, there's 3 of them coming back into Mexico. That may change because of our current president, but we'll get back to that later. So he's got the numbers all wrong, but he doesn't really care if the numbers are right or wrong. It's the message that he wants to send to his constituency. And immigration is what economists call a $500 bill. There's more value added in immigration. Let's say in cross-state immigration between Alabama and Oregon and the state of Connecticut and Florida, right? There's much more value added than trade with immigration. If you have mobility, that's one of the greatest assets that you can have in a country. And one of the great things about the United States is precisely that mobility that it has. It's another thing that's also allowed places like Canada to develop into world-class economies. In any case, I speak not just as a criticism for Trump, but anybody who opposes immigration on that same vein, I think is mistaken. And let me say that Mexico's immigration policies are actually far stricter than the U.S. immigration policy. So we're very hypocritical when we say, oh, we don't like what the narrative. No, I don't. I hate the narrative. We're not bad hombre, and we're a much more diversified country, and we're actually the number one client of the United States as far as exports, U.S. exports are concerned. Those tariffs would have decimated a place like Texas. And you won't find more Trump lovers than in Texas. I think that's the one where maybe Austin is like the Texan Democrats, but outside of that, it's basically completely diehard Republicanism and very much supporters of Trump. And yet they're the ones that were scared to death with the 5% up to 25% tariff increase. So I think he's mistaken on trade because trade is not a zero-sum game. The idea of looking at the balance of payments, basically imports versus exports, as if it were gains and losses, is completely mistaken. Actually, the whole purpose of exports is to import. That's a bit something counterintuitive about trade. But if you think about it from a real point of view, why would you earn money? Well, you want to earn money because you want to spend that money on either your kids' education or on buying or leasing a new car, or maybe buying a new shirt, or giving my wife that money so she'll buy me a nice birthday gift. My birthday's tomorrow, by the way. So
no way.
Day after tomorrow. So
early happy birthday! Thank you for spending some of this evening with us.
Happy early birthday!
Thank you. But my point is, if you think about it, why would you want to earn money? Well, not just to keep it, to hoard that money. You may want to save it for the future, but savings are deferred expenditures. At the end of the day, what you want to do is to consume. You produce in order to consume. And to export is because you want the money to be able to buy things that other people or other places either make better than you do or have a comparative advantage. It's another principle. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to explain, comparative advantage. But trade, at the end of the day, what it does, and the empirical evidence is overwhelming, trade, what it does is it significantly improves the lot of both parties. Why would you want to trade one thing for another with another party unless it benefits you, if it's free and voluntary? And then they talk about fair trade. Okay, all right, there's an ingredient to that, and that's maybe the quip with China. It's not so much the trade deficit, other than really what's happened in many places in China, or China trade policy, is the stealing of intellectual property, right? And copying. And there's even a show, I think, on Showtime or on HBO, on Silicon Valley. I think it's called Silicon Valley.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that one.
Which they have a Chinese roommate, and what he does, he basically steals the property and goes off and becomes a gazillionaire in China with it. And they're making fun of it, they're mocking it. So there's a real issue there. But I think that issue is not going to be solved on the basis of imposing tariffs. The Chinese, still living in a highly authoritarian system, they're accustomed to the pain. So now, if you look at the counterpart, what he's done with tax policy, with deregulation, that has spurred a lot of capital investment, and that has spurred a lot of consumption, and that has spurred a lot of the confidence that is seen in let's say in the stock market, which obviously is not the only measure, but you have low inflation, you have basically the lowest unemployment rate that you've had. He was also lucky. Trump was also lucky that he inherited all the painful deleveraging process that had to be done. So he basically inherited the economy at the tail end of all that. It's like it was in intensive care in 2008, and then it went into intermediate care. And truth be told, some of the Obama regulatory policies I don't think worked as well as he would have wished. But truth be told, also the resiliency and the flexibility of the U.S. economy was able to basically. Many economists have predicted that it would take 8 to 10 years for the U.S. economy to basically rid itself of that enormous painful deleveraging process that is involved. And so once it does that, it's like it begins to run out of the hospital, and all of a sudden it gets a shot of steroids from a tax cut, and another shot of steroids with fiscal spending, and another tremendous shot of vitamins from the aggressive deregulation, the draining of the swamp, and the debureaucratization. So I think, you do a tax cut, and what are tariffs? They're tax increases. The ones that are paying for them are U.S. consumers. Those are the worst off at the end of the day from the tariffs. It's not those that you're not benefiting. You're not really benefiting those that you're basically allowing them to sell at a higher price. If you import steel, well, now steel is more expensive. Well, gee, then Harley Davidson may be in some trouble there, and it has. There's been some relocations. Anyway, I won't get into it, but I think if Trump revised his zealous sect-like religious obsession with trade deficits and with this whole talk of trade, and if he listened to some of the great advisors that he has, like Larry Kudlow or Steve Moore, well, Steve has recently gotten more to attacking trade than before, which is very surprising. Or the new nominee to the board of governors of the Fed, this remarkable woman called Judy Shelton. You tend to listen to more of those. I think he could revise his view on trade. And let me tell you, then the U.S. economy is already doing very well, but it will do even better. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens in the 2020 contest. I think in Mexico, as long as the USMCA is approved, I hope it doesn't go back to the idea of canceling NAFTA, because that'll hurt us a lot, but it's also going to hurt the United States a great deal.
It's fascinating to kind of hear your take on the economy. I love being able to kind of I don't have the economic background to really pick up on the nuances in the way that you've just been describing. I appreciate the analysis that you're bringing there. Now, Roberto, if you could make one policy suggestion to either the United States federal government and to the Mexican government, or maybe even one to each of those, what policy suggestions would you advocate to each of those governments?
Hopefully lower the tariffs.
Well, that's a really good question. Yes. Ethan, you're right on the mark. One of them would be to get rid of the whole tariff war and the if you actually look at the concept of a trade war and you analyze it, it's a contradiction in terms. How can you have a war when trade, the very act of trade, is to exchange one thing for another on a free and voluntary basis? So how can you freely and voluntarily enter into a fight with somebody? You know, it's like it's ridiculous,
and everyone loses.
And trade is about win-win. And whereas basically closing yourself off, imagine you go to your local Walmart or you go to your local 7-Eleven and you want a Diet Coke and a hot dog and some gum, right? And you say no. I'm not going to buy it from you because I'd rather produce my own gum and my own Coke and my own sandwich. My goodness, how long will it take you to do that? Is that making you more competitive or improving your balance of payment situation? Come on, that's so absurd. Well, it's equally absurd because we forget that it's not countries that trade with each other. It's people on different geographical regions that trade with each other. But let's not forget that point. So that would be one item that I would recommend. I would also recommend taking a hard look at some of the great work that some of the think tanks throughout Canada, Mexico, and the United States have done on immigration, where you can actually make markets on immigration. And what is really bothersome about immigration, and especially about illegal immigration, is not just the illegal part. Okay, I'm sorry, it's not just the criminal part. I'm sure maybe El Chapo's cousin is an illegal immigrant, or some distant relative, or some narco is somebody from the Zetas is an illegal immigrant, and they're good illegal immigrants and bad illegal immigrants. The illegal ones that are good, like the former chef who has now legalized himself, but Carlos Payan in Chicago, that now is the first Mexican restaurant that actually was able to get a 1 Michelin star. Imagine that. Not in Mexico, but in Chicago. Don't tell us that in Mexico we wouldn't want to have that human capital back with us. And there's some others, that have been responsible for assassinations and for horrendous crimes and whatnot. But look, that's also the case. If you're going to use that logic, 8 out of every 10 violent crimes committed in Texas are committed, guess by whom? By Texas. Does that mean we have to build a wall around Texas to avoid those Texans going into Oklahoma or perhaps even into Arkansas and whatnot? No. What you do, that's where your rule of law is so special, and your anti-crime and your anti-crime policy becomes so special. You try and minimize that as much as possible, and you apply that to illegal immigrants too. But there are other proposals where you take, for instance, the fiscal cost, the tax cost. How much is this immigrant going to cost the United States government as far as Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, other types of insurance that are paid for by the government? Well, then in order to get in, you have to get a visa, a special visa or a tariff visa, in which you pay the equivalent of what you would cost the U.S. government over the course, let's say, of 15 to 20 years, right? And that might be a gargantuan amount, but you could create financial capital markets where you could be extend a loan that you go off paying little by little once you're legal. And you're going to, and that's, these people spend fortunes on coyotes. You've heard of coyotes, right? Coyotes. Coyotes are basically intermediaries that help illegal immigrants cross into the United States. Sometimes it's actually like allowing yourself to be kidnapped because they extort you, or you run into the most violent and incredibly depressing situations where you've heard about families being, bunched up together in a truck with the coyotes basically and suffocating to death with the Arizona heat and whatnot. Well, instead of spending it on the coyotes, why don't you pay it legally? So these policies make a great deal of sense. As far as my own government is concerned, the new president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, I would recommend that he stop spewing so much nonsense as far as populism and national sovereignty and just begin to do the types of things that are required in order to become a reliable investment regime. Because no person in his right mind or her right mind is going to put money and invest money in a place where you don't know that your property or your investment is going to be secure, or where it can be confiscated at the will of his moment. He canceled the new airport because he thought it was a construction of a new airport because he thought it was a symbol of nepotism. And instead of going against the nepotists, he cancels the airport. Well, what about all the rest of us that had invested over there? He lost the money. So the signal that he's sending is an awful signal where basically he could do whatever the hell he pleases. Excuse my language, but hey, I'm talking about my president.
I'm afraid we Americans don't have any ground to criticize anyone else talking about their president. We don't have very good track records with speaking positively about our presidents, no matter which side of the aisle they happen to come from.
Especially this one, too.
Let me say this. Part of what worries me about the United States is that Mexico has become now your number one trading partner, more than Canada and China. And all you do is hear about the wall and the illegal immigrants and whatnot, and the tariffs and whatnot. You need to study Mexico and to learn about Mexico, because what's going on there is, I think, extremely dangerous right now. You could very quickly have the current government turn into an authoritarian regime, and part of it is you don't want that fire on your back, and not even the strongest and largest and biggest wall in the world is going to detain the potential flood, the resurgence of illegal immigrants if things go sour in Mexico. So you want a neighbor that collaborates with you, and sometimes that nudges you to do the right thing, such as approving the USMCA. But I think in this sense it's extremely important to be able to learn from what's going on. If you learn what's going on in Canada, we'll also learn what's going on in Mexico, on the good side and on the bad side. Look at the incredible amount of trade and economic exchange that takes place at the border. But look at also what happens with issues surrounding some of the failed regions because of the lack of rule of law or the failure of protection of property rights. And to that end, I say here in Mexico, we have to learn, and we can't just unilaterally say that we don't like Donald Trump because of his very foolhardy stance on trade and his very visceral and very damaging narrative. There's an issue of dignity there. On the other hand, you look at some of his other policies, and I think if we're objective, we would have to applaud them. But that's why it's important to learn.
Well, that's certainly an excellent piece of advice, Roberto. Well, let me ask your advice on another area as we're kind of headed towards the end of tonight's episode. Now, I know you've been around debate for quite a while. I think if I'm counting the years right, you said you've been at all but one of the Coolidge Cup debates for the last 6 or 7 years. 7 years. Well, what advice would you offer to novice debaters, to people who have gotten just a taste of debate and that they're kind of excited, but they don't really know what to do yet? And particularly, do you have any economic research tips or any research tips in general or thoughts on communication style? What advice would you offer to people who are brand new to debate?
Well, my first advice is that kids nowadays have the technological wherewithal to be able to very quickly get research. And that's what I've noticed, is how incredibly able they're able to prepare, not even knowing what side they're going to debate. We've done mock debates where I've had to defend protectionism or defend anti-immigration stances, and in order to show these young men and women that are coming to join us, in order to show them what it might look like. If I'm debating Matt Denhart, Matt, by the way, happens to be an expert on immigration. If I'm debating him on issues of immigration, and he does the same thing, what would it look like? And so the first thing I would recommend, and especially if you're going to get involved with Coolidge, is first read about President Coolidge and read Coolidge. Coolidge had the great humility of being a very simple man in terms of his words and his explanations. Also a very serious one. So I think there was a great deal of wisdom involved. And he hated the idea of these know-it-alls from MIT and Harvard and whatnot coming in and saying, "Oh, Mr. President, but the general equilibrium model that I have now shows that if you do this at the right, that, or with this type of formula, and you derive a transcendental deduction of some incredibly complex theorem, which makes you really proud because it shows that it seemingly shows that you're really intelligent. And then you got to explain it to, the regular men and women. That's the hard part. That's the hard part. That's what Coolidge mastered. It was the common sense principles. Let's not forget, economics is about life. Eco comes from home. So that's why it's the economizing of the household. And David Hume understood this, and Adam Smith understood this, and there's Ludwig von Mises certainly understood it. And so, but that means that we all sort of already have, like Plato would have said, a little bit of economic knowledge already inside of us, and we want to do is perfect it. And how to economize is basically how to become more productive, how to do more in less time and with less resources. Why? Because that's going to improve our standard of living. So there's a ton of material that is fortunately available. What would I recommend? I would recommend, first of all, that young men and women read Eat the Rich by P.J. O'Rourke. That's one of the most wonderful textbooks that you'll see. I think some of his examples can actually, he could do a new edition and improve them. But that's a great book because it goes to the heart of the common sense approach to economics. There's another book called Common Sense Economics by Jim Gordon that has gone through several editions. That I would also truly recommend. And then, beyond the just immense amount of research and fantastic research that is going on, I would also recommend a wonderful book by the former editor of The Economist. Oh, by the way, I was also very much involved with The Economist here in Mexico. I used to run their conference program, the magazine, The Economist.
Nice.
I would say read The Economist. Whether you're in favor or you're against what they say, their prose is beautiful and they're always explained it in a very elegant fashion. And you may disagree with them or may agree with them or whatever. There's a great book that was written at the turn of the century by Bill Emmott, former editor of The Economist, called 2021 Vision. And it's sort of like a take. It's not 2020 vision, it's 2021 because we're in the new millennium. And there he talks about the role of dialogue and civilized conversation and public intellectuals. The great Frederick Hayek was like a hero at Hillsdale College, used to say, he who knows economics, knows only economics, knows very little economics. Which means if economics is a science of life, it also has to involve politics, it also has to involve law. It might also even have to involve a study of morality and ethics. And Bill Emmott was able to capture this in outlining the great challenges of the new millennium in this book, 2021 Vision, in which he says, beware of the humbugs who sell you magic wands or instant nirvana or instant solutions to our problems.
Instant nirvana.
That's a great phrase.
That is the second presidential debate. You'll see many politicians saying, "Oh, I'm going to solve Social Security, or I'm going to solve the healthcare, or I'm going to guarantee a Green New Deal, and then I'm going to finance it with modern monetary policy." And a lot of this, you'll hear it back and forth. Or Trump will say that he'll fix everything, and within 1 year that everything will be wonderful and beautiful. And politicians are prone to this. Part of what debate does is deconstruct those myths, is bring us back down to earth. But doing so in a civilized fashion, not in a confrontational fashion, not through insult, not through pejorative, adjectival methods. It's actually through conversation and through an exchange of ideas. And you might disagree at the end of the day, but at least you agree that you're going to disagree. So those would be three of the top of mind readings that I would recommend for anybody that wants to get into debate.
That's awesome. What a great answer.
Those really are some great books and great suggestions and ways to think about it. I love the comparison you made between the very abstract theorem versus something that really can be explained to anyone. I think that's a constant tension in debate.
and how it connects to life too, like how eco relates to home. I actually didn't know that, but I really like how economics isn't just all about economics, but it connects to all of these different areas, and it's more, comprehensive and important and significant than some people make it out to be as well.
It really is. It really is. When people talk about inflation and interest rates, some people don't realize how near and dear to the economic daily activity and our daily routines. Coolidge understood this. Less government. If you reduce the budget, if you reduce government spending, that means more in the pocket of the everyday citizen. That's not like common sense, but he understood it, and he was able to explain it with such remarkable finesse, wisdom, and humility. And that's some of it. Some of that is lacking, and even the great economists of today, people like Dieter McCloskey or Robert Mundell or even Milton Friedman, who passed away over 10 years ago, he would fail his students that were not able to translate all the complex algebra that he would teach them in price theory into simple language.
Wow. As a teacher, I love that idea of flunking the students who can't translate the jargon into everyday language. And that, too, is certainly something that in debate we're always trying to do, because we can never quite get past the idea that you just might have a lay judge no matter what level of tournament you're competing at. Roberto, thank you so much for this conversation tonight. Ethan, I think I've been trying to keep track, and I think I've asked more questions. Do you have any one last question for Roberto before we bring this to a close?
Let's see. I would say if there was any one top life skill, let's say, because I know you're talking about networking earlier as being really important. What's your number one life skill that everybody should strive towards learning?
Okay, now I think that's a really hard question, so please ask it again.
Okay. What is the most important life skill for someone to learn and pursue?
Oh, to learn how to listen.
Wow. Okay.
Learning how to listen, even if you're in disagreement. Don't let your stomach take over your mind.
Is that a Plato reference?
No, that actually comes from a British philosopher called Michael Oakeshott.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of Michael. I used him in a debate case one time.
Yep.
This beautiful book called Rationalism, Politics, and Other Essays, and he has got an essay there, The Voice of Poetry in the Conversation of History, and where he says, why should physics have a superiority over poetry? Why can't we just sit and talk and all of a sudden all of us learn from each other? That makes life richer, and by the way, it makes it a lot more fun.
That's really good to hear a reference to the importance of listening, too, because I feel like in the modern world, listening is really scarce, or at least good listening is really scarce. And you hear a lot of people trying to voice opinions, especially uneducated opinions. So I think you're right on the dot, right on the mark when it comes to listening as being a good virtue to pursue.
You can make uneducated opinions. That's all fine and well. But if you're able to learn from the mistake that you made, and I've gotten crucified by 2 or 3 of these conferences that I've been to.
Oh, yeah, I know that feeling. Josh crucifies me every day.
If Mexico dollarized the economy, then everything would be simple.
I'm just going to go on the record officially saying I do not in any way physically crucify my students just before I actually open myself up to a really horrible lawsuit or any angry parents. That does not happen.
Well, you see all the jabs, and you see it in every day. I used to teach logic, and it's the same debates you see between Trump and Alexandria Ocasio, and how visceral and violent that narrative gets. That also happened during the Reagan era. And I would say, look at the way they're talking to each other. Why can't we talk on the basis of rules of civilized discourse and civility? And so that, I think, would be the greatest. Learning to listen is also embodies a spirit of humility before knowledge. Thinking that you know it all. If somebody says, "Oh, but I'm the one that knows the truth," then you for sure you don't want to engage in a conversation with that person, because somebody that presumes a monopoly on the truth, when he or she gets power, then really bad things can happen. Because how can you're not only combating you're not only saying something false against the politician who claims to speak with the truth, you're also engaging in a case of treason. And that can lead you very quickly down the road, as it did with Stalinist Russia or with Pol Pot or with Mao Zedong, to the grave. And that's the issue of knowledge in politics there, learning how to listen, being civil, being humble before knowledge. That would lead me to recommend one fourth last reading, which is the Nobel lecture by Frederick Hayek on the use and abuse of knowledge in science. It's a beautiful essay that teaches you about the limits of knowledge.
Wow. Yeah. I like the point about good listening for sure. And how debate, because definitely one of our goals at What's the Res is to help use debate to assist in discovering truth. And I think, again, you're right on the mark when you say that a lot of people think that they have the truth, but when they get into power, then it's quite evident that they don't. Do you think debate plays a large role in helping discover truth through civil discourse?
I think so. I think at least it teaches you to be closer to.
I agree. I completely agree.
Or at least to revise your views, right? If you stick to a point and you're not, and no matter what, and come what may, and that's going to be the point, and regardless of the facts, then how can you possibly engage in debate, let alone dialogue?
That goes back to the humility thing too, because
a very good dialogue entails dialectic, entails exchanging one idea for the other, but it has to be in a civilized fashion. It has to be rule-based, and that's what's so beautiful about debate.
I completely agree. I think this has been a great interview. So thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate this.
Well, please send me a link where we can listen to this, or I can show it off to my wife.
Oh. For sure. We definitely will.
We'll do that. We would like to. We're recording this on, what is today? Tuesday night. We're hoping to drop this on Friday, so we'll send you a link as soon as it is live. Roberto, thank you so much for this conversation. This has been truly a joy to get to learn more about you and your work, and really to hear your advice and your views on debate and communication. It's been really helpful this evening.
Josh, thank you, and Ethan as well, and for everybody at What the Res. I hope to be able to converse with you soon.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, too, for joining us tonight for this special episode of What's the Res. We will be back very shortly with our regular episodes, which are part of the ongoing conversation about the current resolutions in the world of high school debate. Come August 8th, the NSDA will release the public forum and Lincoln Douglas resolutions, and we'll be here with analysis episodes as soon as those do. Ethan, where can our listeners get in touch with us if they want to do that?
If you want to get in touch with us, you can always email us at whatstheres@gmail.com. That's WHATSTHERES@gmail.com. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Reddit at whatstheres_, or visit our website. That's www.whatstheres.com. And we will be sure to get back to you. We'd appreciate any feedback you have.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for joining us tonight. And until next time,
work hard, speak well, and seek the truth.